Hi, everybody. My name is Neil Seidman, and I'm co-chair of the Public Education Committee for ADAA. That's the Anxiety and Depression Association of America. And welcome to our webinar, which is titled Financial Stress Due to COVID-19. What are some stress relieving tips that we can get from the experts? And before I introduce our panel, I just want to say just a bit about ADAA. Our webinars are presented by ADAA, which is the Anxiety and Depression Association of America, which is the leading nonprofit in the field of anxiety and depression. And I just want to let everybody know about our website, adaa.org. It's a really, really great resource. You'll find a list of treatment providers. You just click on Find a Therapist right from the homepage. We also have a free peer-to-peer online support group, which you can also find on our homepage. And then finally, you can support ADAA by making a small charitable donation on the website. So let me get to introducing our panel. Dr. Debra Kissen. Thank you for joining us, Debra. Debra is the co-chair of the Public Education Committee for ADAA. She's the executive director of the Light on Anxiety CBT Treatment Center in Chicago. Dr. Kissen is the author of Panic Workbook for Teens and Rewire Your Anxious Brain for Teens. We're also happy to have Nick Koski. Thank you, Nick, for joining us. Nick is a certified financial planner. He's one of the owners of BDF LCC, which is an independent private wealth management firm in Chicago. And I want to just quote from Nick's bio, just a little bit about Nick's approach. Nick recognizes that working with clients is about more than helping them navigate their finances. Clients come to BDF often with a great understanding of finances, but they need help in other areas to pull the whole picture together. And Nick helps his clients create a holistic view of what they can achieve. So welcome, Nick. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. And
finally, I want to welcome Christina Carrick. Is it Carragillo? Did I pronounce it?
Close.
Okay. Christina is a certified financial planner, and she's a senior advisor at the same firm, BDF LLC. And I just want to quote just a bit from her bio. Christina works with clients to help them turn their goals into reality. She's also a part of BDF's divorce practice group, where she helps individuals going through divorce coming out of the process on a strong financial footing. And her passion is building relationships and helping provide people with financial peace of mind. So thank you, Nick and Christina, for joining us.
Thank you.
So I'd like to start, maybe Nick and Christina can just start out with some practical tips. One of the questions that we get right now, because we're at the beginning of May, what do I do to get my stimulus payment? What about if I have to, I've been trying to apply for unemployment insurance, just real practical ideas. What thoughts do you have on that area or other tips that you might want to start with?
Sure. Well, thanks, Neil, and thanks, Debra. You know, before we get into kind of the details, one of the things I just wanted to touch on right at the top is one of the things with Christina and I, we're both really kind of nuts and bolts financial planners. And one of the things we realize that's really important to kind of what's going on today is that there's a lot of uncertainty. And as planners, you know, we kind of don't like uncertainty, so to speak, right? Because it goes against what our plan might be. So we'll try to kind of position our comments today, especially the ones on both stimulus and unemployment and some of these other things on, well, what is your plan and what can you do to kind of stick to it when things get a little bit harder to manage, so to speak? So with that, sorry, Christina, I didn't mean to cut you off on your comments, but I kind of want to set that backdrop from how we kind of see things from our perspective.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And that was actually the first thing I was going to say is I think the number one best advice that I could give to anyone is just to have a plan. So that's something that you have in good times and in bad, and you have the discipline to kind of stick to it as best as you can to kind of get out of these darker times that we're in right now. So that's kind of the first thing I would say. And so your next question is probably like, all right, what does that mean? How do I have a plan? I know it's not anyone's favorite thing to do, but really building a budget is important, and it's something that I recommend everybody do. I find that just listing out all of your expenses can be eye-opening, and from there you can kind of say, all right, are there things I'm paying for that I don't need? Do I need to cut, expenses anywhere? And then that just gives you kind of a holistic view on, where is all of your money going? And then the third thing I would say is when times are good, be sure that you're paying yourself first. So be sure that you're saving. And a good rule of thumb is what's known as the 50-20-30 rule. So what that means is for every paycheck, take 50%, and then that goes towards non-discretionary expenses. So things that are not up for debate on if you need them or not, paying your mortgage, paying rent, paying for the electricity, paying for food. All those things are the most important. So really the biggest piece, that 50% chunk should go there. And then there's the 20%, which is what I said earlier, pay yourself first. So 20% of your paycheck, kind of put that into a bucket for savings for the future. That could be employer 401k plan. It could be just into a checking account. Any kind of starting point will do, but that 20% is a really good mark to kind of aim for. And then the remaining 30% is the fun part. So obviously you're working hard for your money and you got to enjoy it a little bit too. So that 30% is for discretionary expenses. So, paying for Netflix or going out to dinner, entertainment, all those sorts of things. So kind of having guidelines around how much you're going to put into each bucket is something that I think is really helpful for people. So that's a good rule of thumb that I like to use.
And Neil, if I could inject it, what Christina and Nick were just sharing got me thinking about a recent client session I just had the other day, and talking about budgeting with a client and how she was using this time where she's we're in lockdown and you have a little bit more time, but you're also more anxious. And she's been really avoiding for couple of years, the thought of really looking at our budget. It just feels we've spent a lot of work trying to build up to having the organizational skills and also emotionally tolerating all the thoughts that could come along with it, and really trying to point out how all the avoidance was actually causing her a lot more anxiety. And when she finally sat down and the numbers weren't all pretty and there were some hard truths to look at, but she felt so much better and stronger being informed. But so much time that we'd spent trying to get her there to just sit down and really look and see that reality. And so her predictions of how scary that was going to be, and it wasn't less scary because she had more money in there, it was less scary because she now had knowledge and was facing up to her situation. So it was a good example of how liberating it could feel, even if it's a hard process.
Well, and I would say, to add on to that, we love that you're even talking about budget. I had a conversation with a client about this just recently, and the idea was there was a lot of fear around, well, I don't know what the budget should look like. And so I think a lot of times folks will start off on the path of this budget exercise and say, well, I don't even know how much I should be spending. To try to set a budget without really knowing what you're spending your money on to begin with is like trying to run an 8-minute mile and then all of a sudden say, well, no, I'm going to run a 6-minute mile. And somehow magically you trim 2 minutes off of each mile just by hoping you can do that. We would want to go from an 8-minute mile to like a 7-minute and 45-second mile. And part of that kind of first step would be to just track where you're spending money. So with that downtime that you mentioned, Debra, it's kind of an ideal time to say, well, okay, where is my money going, like Christina said, and start to understand, what am I actually spending my money on? Not from some sort of judgmental or scoring process, but just to start to understand the reality of it.
Do you have any tips on what, if I'm trying to do this on my own, what some resources might be? I don't know, an app, or should I learn well, or just do it on paper? It doesn't matter as long as I.
That actually is also free. So there's two that you see people use a lot, and one is mint.com. And that actually links to your bank accounts and your credit cards, and it'll actually start to bucket things out for you. So it does a lot of the work itself. And that's a good resource there. But also a lot of people use Quicken. So those are both good options, and they kind of, like I said, they do it automatically for you. So you're not going in and doing each line item yourself.
So Quicken, and then the other one is Mint, M-I-N-T?
Correct, yep.
And to ask you guys, I see a lot of perfectionism around this in clients. Like, I need to be a budget expert. I need to make sure I have every single bit of data from the last few years in order to organize, versus a good enough budget and a good enough place to start. And so if you could just kind of, the down and dirty of, if you just want to get started and you have some information, but you don't have all the information, how people can get started trying to get educated about their current situation and where they might want to go moving forward.
I think that's a great point. I mean, my wife has the curse of being married to a financial planner. So we always watch what we spend our money on, and we probably scrutinize it too much. But to your point, Debra, I think if you're understanding where the larger parts of your money or your paycheck, so to speak, are going, that's what's really important. The $1.47 that you spend on, a pack of gum or something like that really isn't going to move the needle. But if you're also not really recognizing the fact that you're spending so much on rent, but you're justifying it in different ways by saying, no, I'm not really spending 2/3 of my paycheck on rent. This is for, access to a gym and other things. You might be kind of missing the forest for the trees there. So I wouldn't scrutinize those big expenses. It's kind of those larger ones that are going to kind of stack up each month.
Yeah, I think that would free people up a lot from, it's either all or nothing. Like, either make sure I understand exactly, and so many expectations of what that would look like, that gets overwhelming, and then forget it, I'll do that next month. So that's helpful.
So if I wanted to start doing this, and we're recording this on May 1st, but if I wanted to start doing this, say, for the coming month, what about the idea of, I'm just going to keep a record of what my income is that's coming in, what my expenses that are going out, and maybe use that as a basis for starting to have a budget as I go forward?
Yeah, I think that's a great starting point. Like Debra said, I think the first hurdle is just getting started. And so, if you just pick this month and you say, all right, for May, I'm going to look at, what income do I have coming in minus what is going out? I think you could probably, in most cases, generally just apply that by 12, and then you have a look at your whole year. But it's important to be mindful of other, like, one-off big expenses and things like that. But no, I think as a general rule, that would work.
And then, depending on everybody's individual situation, there could be a lot of challenges in, well, this month is different from last month, or I have to get my unemployment check. And
well, and that's an excellent point. So if we start to understand what the pattern is, and to Christina's point, if we just start off by tracking the information, we're not going to try to judge what is good or bad at this point. We just want to know where the money is going. From there, we can start to say, well, hey, can we start to, and this kind of comes back to your question, Neil, about kind of what tips should people be following, is we want to see most people have between 3 to 9 months worth of spending money, meaning their kind of household budget set aside in kind of a rainy day fund. And I think a lot of people are going through rainy days right now in terms of just whether jobs are uncertain or have been lost. And so it's really important in good times to know that you're setting aside money for that kind of future uncertainty. So part of the plan that we talk about with folks with financial planning in general is establishing something like that emergency or rainy day fund that has maybe 3, 6, 9 months worth of kind of budget money in it. So when things get lean, we can kind of lean on that account, so to speak. And that's really important. Now it's much easier said than done, right? Based on where we're at. So I think that's more of a think ahead as things get better for people. But in general, that's really a building block of kind of smart financial planning in general.
What tips do you guys have for someone who maybe just lost their job or got laid off for who knows how long, and maybe that they work in an industry like, the vacation industry or event planning or something that is not going to look so good for the coming year? Any tips? Let's say that I'm looking at maybe have to start a new career or consider. Do you have any tips for me and what I might be doing with my time sitting at home?
Yeah, so I think, go ahead, Debra.
Oh, well, I can just jump in from sort of the therapeutic perspective, and really, I try to not be too half full sometimes with clients, because this is a really hard time, and when I get too cheerleadery and like, let's use this time, it's super annoying, and I really do that. Sometimes it's okay to just like, this is a hard time, and I'm just going to mourn for the fact that there's so many difficult things happening and losses, and just allow oneself to feel really upset, disappointed, angry. And then there's also a space for, sorry, I'm just trying to, is my volume okay? Do you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
A space for a little rebirth, a little growth, a little sense of what shifts can I take in my life. So I'm speaking with a client right now where she was furloughed from her company. So talking about what kind of maybe online trainings can she do. She's wanted to maybe move up professionally and get more onto the management side of the profession that she's in, and not as much the technical side. So finding together, looking through different course offerings that she can take and start building up that skill set. Also using a time to inventory past jobs, that what were fulfilling, what weren't, and starting to really think about what would that next career look like that could bring together different elements that have worked for her, and maybe less of the elements that weren't as helpful. So there's the time. It's less right now having the energy and the emotional resources, but maybe if it's just a couple of minutes a day, it doesn't have to be all day. Maybe there's a time when you're feeling that you're most motivated, and you know yourself. When I first wake up in the morning, around have my cup of coffee, I'm feeling hopeful. You could do this kind of half an hour day of kind of rethink your professional journey and what that might look like. And I'll pass it on to Nick and Christina to see if they have any thoughts on that.
I think the other thing I would add on to that is, as folks are maybe reassessing, well, was this the right line of work for me? I think those are really big questions, and it might even be kind of too big of a question to try to answer all at once. But I do think exploring some level of training, and again, it's easier said than done, but training typically costs money, but there are different resources out there. We've seen some folks go back to some levels of kind of technology training where maybe they want to do coding or otherwise. And there are tuition programs out there based on what the curriculum might be, where there's ways to basically kind of push off, knowing that you'll eventually be rejoining the workplace, but using this time to maybe go into some training that you'll eventually kind of pay for in the future, but could have some upside to it. The biggest thing, though, I would think, is to not necessarily dig yourself a hole in this time either, saying, well, hey, I'm going to go back and take on a lot of student debt or something along those lines, because that to me would just kind of add to the level of maybe anxiety or stress, and that really probably wouldn't make a lot of sense. I think focusing on little things you can control, or little tutorials or additional education, are really kind of the little steps we think about right now.
Right, and I have seen a lot of different education vendors offering their courses for free during the month, and so there is a lot of altruism through online programs that I'm noticing, whether it's small meditation programs or even in my industry, trainings that in the past would have cost a lot more money. So I think a lot of people are trying to do their part, and I've seen a lot of good deals on the educational front. So that's one thing, because just to feel that it's possible to move forward, that there will be a future one day, it's important for hope, and it's true too. So.
You know, and I don't mean to kind of belabor the point, but one other item I might recommend, we all kind of have our own networks, so to speak, at work, whether it's folks we work with and see on a daily basis, or there's other potentially professionals or just colleagues we see on a regular basis. Sometimes having the downtime is a good idea too, to reconnect with people we haven't connected with as much. So whether we just know them professionally or are connected on LinkedIn, I think this is a good time now to kind of look back at who you've kind of been connected with in the past and who would be a good person to reconnect with. And the other thing would be, don't be shy about reaching out to other folks that are in industries that you're interested in. I think a lot of us right now feel like there's a way to kind of pay it forward by either being helpful to others that need help right now. So even if it's just an informational call or conversation someone might have with maybe, folks like that, like us in financial planning, about the field of financial planning. I've fielded 2 of those calls with folks that aren't in our field, but they're really interested in it. So I think the ask of maybe calling on someone and asking them about their industry or profession because you're interested in it is another way to start to kind of do some due diligence too on maybe a career change you're considering.
And that, given this strange time, people that are normally so busy, you might actually have a better chance of connecting with someone and them having those extra minutes that they'd want to reply to an email and give a tip or two that normally, that would be so nice, I'm going to get back to it, and then it falls down on their email. But these days most of us have a little bit more bandwidth, so it might be a time that you can make connections that otherwise would have been even more difficult. So strange byproducts of this time we're in.
And then I'm getting the idea that if I reach out to, like you were saying, Nick, maybe people that I've been connected with in the past, or reaching out to someone that's in a field that I want to explore, someone that I may not know, that I just, or maybe just have a little bit of contact with, making those connections, I think, is really nurturing and can help us with the emotional side and the anxiety side. Debra, I like what you said a few minutes ago about, you were talking about a client session and how they were talking about their financial challenges, and the way you started with them is just honoring what they were experiencing.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of jumping right to, well, here's what you should do to get, address it.
Right.
Maybe that can lead us into some of the questions we get about dealing with the anxiety and the stress.
Mm-hmm.
The questions that people have sent in is, I just lost my job. And yes, I'm doing things to address the finances the best I can, but how do I deal with my own anxiety and stress? And how do I talk to my family and my kids about it? Debra, you have some thoughts?
Yeah, I would say, number one, it's super duper anxiety provoking and stressful. So it's makes sense, and they're valid emotions to show up. And then trying to separate out worry and ruminating from active problem solving, because sometimes worry and rumination pretends that it's like dress up. It pretends that it's actually problem solving. So sitting there thinking like, how am I going to ever pay for my kids' college? Like, I've made such terrible decisions that I've destroyed my family's hopes for the future. Like, I'm the worst. And you're, in some ways, our brains feel like they're accomplishing something by worrying or ruminating. Like, what was I thinking, doing that in the past? And when we're stuck in a worry or ruminating cycle, our physiology actually calms down a little bit. So it's like this hook. Like, people are like, I can't stop worrying. Well, what makes it hard to stop worrying is actually our parasympathetic nervous system kicks in, or we get a little bit more of a sense of calm when we're worrying, like, because
That's
Our
an
brain,
interesting point. I don't think most of us wouldn't have thought of that.
right? People feel that, oh, I don't like doing it, but why do I keep doing it? Well, the reason we keep doing it, there's a little bit of a hook to it, for we get this temporary sense of calm, but it's sort of this fake sense of relief. Like our brain's like, oh, okay, we're accomplishing something, but it's more that like you're stuck in a ditch and the only tool you have is a shovel, so you just keep shoveling. Like it feels like you're doing something, but are you really getting anywhere, or are you getting kind of deeper into it? So kind of catching yourself when you're thinking about your situation and your next steps for your career and your financial. Is it just worrying? And I keep going like this because it has this like circular, you're not really getting anywhere. You just keep thinking about it, and it might even the same thought is looping back over different versions, versus problem solving has a more linear, okay, what are the challenges? What are potential solutions? What are next steps I could try? Who do I need to communicate with? It feels, it's hard, but it feels like there's a certain momentum to it when and it could look the same. So I'm going to just see you sitting there thinking, but are you thinking problem solving? Or are you thinking by worrying and ruminating? So that's kind of the first thing that comes to mind, is trying to notice the distinction, maybe setting up a certain amount of time each day to try to problem solve around how to proceed forward. And sometimes it might take another person to help you. It doesn't have to be, if you could be so lucky as to work with Nick and Christina or someone like that. But even if it's just someone in your life, having an external person versus trying to think it through on your own is so helpful. And so it could be just anyone that's sitting on the outside and helping you think through what are some next steps that you can do.
Now, if I find myself doing that kind of looping, unhelpful worrying, maybe I'm doing that before going to bed, or maybe after I'm in bed. And
Yeah.
any simple tip on how I could get out of that or break that habit?
Well, step one is noticing when it's happening. So like the first step in creating change is like noticing you have a problem. So if you could just start flagging, I do this like sometimes in session with a client, or, okay, is that happening right now? Like what's going on? So even for yourself, like, okay, it's happening. Like I'm more in this ruminating cycle or worry cycle. And then step two, trying to work a different mental muscle, or a different, any kind of muscle. That could just be kind of like rebooting. So it could be standing up and doing a jumping jack. It could be putting some cold water in your face. It could be standing outside and feeling air, but kind of rebooting and trying to get past that stuck point, and then deciding, how do I want to proceed, versus being held captive by the worry. You can decide, like, how do I want to proceed with this moment? And Nick and Christine, I feel like I'm kind of hogging this end of the portion, but if you guys have any thoughts on this,
I certainly think the way you're approaching it, and obviously we're not mental health professionals, so we're really looking at this from a financial standpoint, but we're very hesitant to make quick, easy decisions when things get bad. So what I mean by that is the general, or I should say, sometimes the common response to a bad market, or people losing money in the market, I should say, is that they want to retreat to safety and own the things that are safest. And that's typically, in a bad market, kind of the worst time to do it. But to your point, it almost is calming, because it allows you to kind of say, well, okay, I'm doing something. It may not be good for me, but I'm doing something, and that's allowing me that kind of breath. That's where, with our job, we ask a lot of questions when things get like this, to start to understand, well, where is the worry coming from? Is it because you feel like you've made a long-term decision, or a bad decision that's going to impact your long-term? Is it because you're not sleeping at night? Is it because you thought you had too much risk to begin with? So we really have to identify where that anxiety is coming from before we can really talk about, well, what are some viable solutions? And typically, the best solution is to kind of keep doing what we're doing with our investments or our plan, and that's what really works. But sometimes people need relief, and they need to make some decisions.
It's interesting because we talk a lot about compulsions or safety behaviors. They're different behaviors that we engage in. We get short-term relief, but long-term potential suffering, versus some of the shorter term discomfort that creates some of the longer term relief. But a lot of when we're stuck in the anxiety cycle, we just want to do something to feel better. And so kind of challenging ourselves and clients when it has that impulse that like it just has to happen now. Can we ride it out? Can we give it a bit more time until it feels more like a choice versus an impulse that you just have to do? And it's interesting thinking about that on the financial side, how you guys see that and similar implications.
Let me bring up another example of someone that is worried. My stocks have gone down, and I'm just really worried about it. And I keep checking them, 3 times a day or every hour. Did they go up? What's happening in the market? And is this sound productive? And anybody have some ideas for me if I'm doing that?
Yeah, so whenever I get that call from a client, the most important thing to do is obviously always to listen and to just acknowledge how they're feeling, similar to what Debra said. We can just acknowledge that this is not fun, and no one likes seeing a negative number on a statement or feeling like they're losing money and losing control. So that's the first thing. But then you kind of take it back a step and you say, again, kind of going back to what I said at the beginning of this, we have a plan. The plan is still the same. We know that this is just kind of what being an investor is. The market goes up, the market goes down. Most of the time, the market goes up. And actually, there's some research that's come out on behavioral finance that says you feel 3 times as bad if I take money from you versus if I give you the same amount of money. So it's just how we're wired as humans, and you're not alone, and it's not fun, but we do know that this is what is normal. And again, it goes back to sticking to the plan and having the discipline to know that we're going to get out of this and it's going to be better long term.
Debra, do you have any comments about if I'm someone who I'm trying to cope with my worries about my stock, and so I'm checking.
Right. And so those kind of checking compulsions all throughout time, we see clients that are just all day long, and it could be checking their bank accounts all day long to make sure that no money left that shouldn't be leaving and that all of their statements look fine. Or it's very similar to checking the door once to make sure you locked it, but then checking the door again to make sure you locked it. And the funny thing about checking is checking starts as a way to minimize doubt, but the more we check, the more actually it creates the doubt cycle. So people are looking for certainty, so they check more, and then studies have shown really someone who doesn't have any tendencies towards OCD like behaviors or thought processes, but if you get them to check enough times, they will start feeling more doubt. So the very act of check, there's a time to check, and so I'm not saying don't totally put your head in the sand. And so finding that sweet spot where you're staying informed and you're not avoiding information, but you're not so desperately trying to gain control and know everything that you just feel more out of control and more uncertain. So yeah, we certainly see that across a lot of different checking behaviors, along with financially checking.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, sorry to interrupt you there, Neil. That's so spot on, because we know, and there's a lot of good data actually out of the University of Chicago on this from a behavioral finance standpoint. The happiest investors are the ones that really don't look at their portfolio all that often. And so what I mean by that,
Nick, that's such a great point. Could you say that again?
The happiest investors are the ones that look at their portfolios the least. So the less time we spend monitoring and the more time we spend just living, so to speak, the better off we are in terms of letting our kind of portfolio do what it should do. And obviously, speaking in a portfolio sense probably isn't the best context here, but we know investors that look every day kind of climb the wall of worry every day, whether it's good or bad, because good days are never good enough and bad days always feel terrible.
Great point. Great point. So how about, what would be a simple way of interrupting my checking behavior if I'm checking my stocks every day?
Stop. Stop. Stop opening up your computer and having that app either on the front part of your screen or the first thing you go to.
Yeah.
The other thing I would do is, it sounds kind of old timey, but just wait for your quarterly or monthly statement. As investors, we used to be really good at that. And I can still remember when there wasn't even a push to paperless wasn't even an option, right? And you would wait until the end of the month to get your statement. But now we need literally data by the second in the market.
Right.
And to me, that's too much. And if you're a trader, that's one thing. If you're an investor, it's very different. But just the amount of information it can be overwhelming. And that goes for a lot of different things,
Right.
not just investing.
What about if I just deleted that app altogether? Would that be okay if I don't get that?
Great idea.
Okay. Here's another question that came in, and this sounds like somebody who, just because of what's going on with their own finances right now, they're depleting savings, maybe building up debt, and they're worried about that. Any comments?
I think the debt part of it can be really tough. And I'll start off by saying we don't do a lot of work in the debt space, but I will say some of the questions we get the most are around things like debt consolidation or I'm trying to get a handle on my debt. So what are the things I should be doing? The best and biggest piece of advice we could give on that side would be, as folks are thinking about debt and how they should manage it, first of all, getting on some level of payment plan is really important, because you're now going to add some certainty rather than just opening up envelopes with late fees on them. I would also encourage folks that have overdue payments or payments they think they may not be able to make to communicate to the people that they owe the money to see if something can be worked out in terms of a payment plan. We've seen banks, mortgage companies in general be pretty reasonable this time through in terms of kind of where we're at. So if you go back to 08, 09, when things were really tough the last time like this, banks and mortgage companies weren't doing that. They've kind of learned a very valuable lesson, and they are being a bit more human about things today. And then the last piece would be on debt consolidation. There are a lot of folks out there that would love to help you consolidate your debt. And some of them can be great, some of them can be not so great, and maybe even looking to take advantage of consumers. So our best advice there is to focus on those debt consolidators that are nonprofits. So it's going to be pretty simple to identify whether or not it's a for-profit or nonprofit debt consolidator, and those are the best to target, the ones that are
So there are going to be probably some nonprofit organizations, most likely in my area, that could advise me about ways of doing debt consolidation.
I think a quick Google search of nonprofit debt consolidators in my area is a good place to start.
That's great.
Okay.
That's very helpful. Yeah, I was just thinking, what would I Google? That was exactly what I was thinking, and then you answered it. So thank you.
Okay, great. So maybe to kind of wrap up, Debra, do you have any tips on just, I'm doing the best I can, but I'm just feeling stressed and anxious with my finances?
Yeah, I would say step one, make room for some of the discomfort and tolerate. This feels hard. This is scary. I feel it.
So honor what I'm feeling. Don't try to suppress it.
And then finding a moment of, okay, what can I do to take a step forward? I would say, like, what is when there's so many different challenges, like I'm worried about my debt, and I'm worried about my job, and I'm worried about my kids' college fund, and is this a time to take money out of retirement account? When there's so many different stressors at one time, then saying, okay, if I had a magic wand, what is the first financial stress that I would try to tackle first? And then try to come up with a plan for that one. So you can't find a new job, consolidate your debt, start saving for your kids. You can't do everything at once. So if you could make a little bit of progress in one, which one would that be? And try to allow an honest answer to bubble up. And then from that one, what are 5 steps I could start to take to start chisel away at that one? And like I said, sometimes it really does need another person sitting down with you to break that down even further. And it could just, it's just that external person. And then there's going to be a step, no matter what, that we could all take.
And just one last question, maybe for Nick and Christina. Let's say I've never worked with a financial planner before and I don't have a big portfolio, but I'm really liking the tips that I'm hearing in the webinar. Is it okay for me to reach out and just find a financial planner in my state or my area? And could I get a consultation, or what tips do you have there?
I think that's a great question. My best advice there would be to look up an association. It's a nonprofit group called NAPFA. It's a National Association of Personal Financial Advisors. So NAPFA.org. And they have
NAPFA.org.
And they have a find an advisor tool on their website for kind of a local search you could do to find a fee-only planner. That would be someone that could either work for you on an hourly or project basis, potentially even pro bono. I don't know. I can't speak for everyone. That you might be able to then kind of pair up with and do some of the planning that Christina and I have kind of talked about. But that would be a great starting point, because for a lot of people, just a couple hours of planning can go a long way.
Right. Well, we have to wrap up. Thank you, everybody, for these tips. I think you conveyed a lot of really great information in a short time.
Yeah, it's very helpful. This is very, very helpful.
And I want to thank everybody for watching. Feel free to like the webinar and share it. And then if you have questions, you can email your questions to webinars@adaa.org. So thanks again, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye now.